One thing you might occasionally hear from longtime Zelda fans is that Link's Awakening is one of the best games in the series. As much as I like Breath of the Wild and Ocarina of Time, Link's Awakening is at the very least the Zelda game that I look back on with the fondest memories. And after playing the demo at E3, I became even more excited for the remake. That said, it did occur to me that maybe I've been looking back on the original through rose-tinted glasses. So I decided to play it again via Virtual Console on my 3DS. And that sealed the deal. Not only does Link's Awakening hold up, it remains one of the greatest Zelda games ever made. But here's the big question: should you pay $60 for the remake? We'll know the full answer to that when the game releases on September 20th, but if it delivers on all of its promises, then yes, you should absolutely buy this game. This is a stunning remake of one of the best games in one of the best franchises of all time. But if you're still not convinced, then you're in the right place. I'm going to share what it was like to play the demo at E3, how the original game holds up, and what's been improved upon. So kick back, maybe subscribe to the channel, and let's take a look at everything we know about the gameplay of Link's Awakening for the Nintendo Switch. The first thing I was reminded of when playing the demo at E3 is how quickly Link's Awakening gets started. Less than a minute after the first cutscene and without any tutorials, you're exploring the overworld. I also immediately recognized the same level of hand-holding and perhaps more importantly, lack of hand-holding that makes the Zelda games so rewarding. Link's Awakening is never so direct as to mark your destinations with a waypoint, yet the game always offers just the right clues to point you in the right direction. Classic Zelda. After completing a few short objectives, I remembered why I love this game so much. More than any other Zelda, Link's Awakening feels like one giant scavenger hunt. The main quest has you traversing Koholint Island in search of 8 sacred instruments, but what makes it so addictive and such a perfect handheld experience is that between dungeons, you've always got a bite-sized task to complete, puzzle to solve, or item to track down. In the E3 demo, which follows the beginning portion of the original game to a T, I had to find my sword, then harvest a mushroom, which I then gave to a witch, who brewed a potion, which eventually helped me obtain a key. And that's just in the first 10 minutes. This style of questing is best exemplified by the game's famous and quirky trading quest. I won't spoil it, but I will say that it's way more than your typical side mission, and the way that it stretches across most of the game's world map is a stroke of game design genius. In fact, it worked so well that similar trading quests were adopted by nearly every Zelda game thereafter. Just one reason why Link's Awakening isn't just one of the best Zelda games, it's also one of the most influential. So the demo does stick to the original formula, but it's important to remember that it's based on a 25-year-old game. Having been built within the confines of the original 8-bit Game Boy, the world map is somewhat small, at least by Zelda standards. And that's probably not going to change, especially since the remake looks to be such a faithful one-to-one recreation of the original. But don't be discouraged. Despite its size, Link's Awakening features the same number of dungeons as the typical Zelda game, and it's packed with secrets and collectibles. To give you an idea of what to expect, it's only about an hour or two shorter than A Link to the Past or A Link Between Worlds, and that's without taking into account the new dungeon creator, which I'll talk about later. Plus, I actually think the compact overworld makes the game better. Backtracking is always a quick affair, and hunting down specific items and locations never feels like searching for a needle in a haystack. Also worth noting is that the primitive world map of the Game Boy version has been replaced by this gorgeous hand-drawn map. Unexplored areas are now marked by faint and weathered sketches, which will help find your way even if you're headed to a new area. But that's not the only improvement that makes exploring Koholint Island feel more modern. In the original game, the camera didn't follow Link as he explored the overworld. Instead, it stayed still, then panned to the next frame when Link reached the border of your screen. But in the remake, the camera now moves fluidly, seamlessly following Link wherever he goes. No jerky transitions from section to section. Second, due to the Game Boy's 2-button layout, the original game only allowed for 2 items to be equipped at once. This included your sword, yet some obstacles might require, say, both bombs and arrows. In that case, you'd have to unequip your sword just to solve a simple puzzle. But now, with the miracle of modern controllers, your essential items like your sword are constantly mapped to certain buttons, doing away entirely with the outdated inventory management system. Good riddance. One peculiar upgrade to the game's menu includes this little feature called Memories. Now, I didn't notice this when I actually played the game, so I didn't ask about it, but after doing some research, I found that the remake will feature a journal that lets you recall certain in-game conversations that might have included important information, such as directions to a certain location. I'd bet my last rupee that's exactly what this feature is. We're also getting updated minigames, including the crane game, which features updated physics, the fishing game, which features at least one new prize, and the rafting minigame, which has been completely redesigned and now lets you use your hookshot to change course. One final reason the overworld in Link's Awakening stands out is that, well, this isn't Hyrule. Sure, other Zelda games have taken place in other regions, but I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, I believe that Link's Awakening is the only Zelda game that lacks any mention of Hyrule or any appearance of Princess Zelda, Ganondorf, or the Triforce. Removing the game so far from typical lore enabled the developers to give Koholint Island an air of constant mystery and populate it with a bizarre and often suspicious cast of characters. In fact, the original game's cast and the island itself were largely influenced by the popular 80s TV show Twin Peaks, where everyone seems to be hiding something and nothing is as it seems. One more bit about the cast. You probably already know that Link's Awakening features characters and enemies from the Mario games. But did you know that Mr. Wright, who you'll meet just north of the mysterious forest, is based on a character from the Super Nintendo version of Sim City? Or that one of the game's enemies is modeled after Kirby? Just another reason that Link's Awakening is so unique. But enough about the world itself. Let's talk about the dungeons. If you've played any mainline Zelda game other than Breath of the Wild, you'll know what to expect from the dungeons in Link's Awakening. Defeat a mini-boss, discover a new item, use said item to solve the rest of the dungeon, and finally, defeat the main boss. It's a testament to the ingenuity of the Zelda franchise that this formula remains as fun today as it was all those years ago. And while the early dungeons are pretty easy, the later dungeons require crafty thinking and demand that you keep close track of which rooms you've explored and which chests you've plundered. As for the puzzles, I'd say they're on par with other 2D Zelda games in the franchise. Ever since A Link to the Past, Zelda dungeons have always featured clever brain teasers, but what makes them so engaging is that each dungeon as a whole can feel like one giant puzzle to be solved. Thankfully, that's absolutely the case with Link's Awakening. Even regular combat can feel like a puzzle. Enemies will be trickier thanks to updated AI, but the game also encourages you to defeat even common enemies using the various items you've acquired throughout your journey. This is pretty normal for Zelda games, but what's decidedly not normal are these 2D side-scrolling sections. Anytime you enter a staircase, you'll tackle one of these areas before reappearing on the other side. They feature some really simple platforming, but more interestingly, they feature Goombas, piranha plants, and other Mario-based enemies. There's no challenge to be had here, but seeing Nintendo mash up two of their most precious properties in such a bizarre way is something every Nintendo enthusiast should experience. Jumping back to my time with the game at E3, I wasn't able to get through the entire first dungeon within the time limit, but I did watch someone else who was. In comparing his experience with my experience playing through the original game, it looks like the dungeons, just like the overworld, will be meticulously recreated item for item, puzzle for puzzle, and enemy for enemy. But as with the overworld, there are some excellent quality of life upgrades that look to bring the dungeon crawling experience into the modern age. For example, in the original, there were multiple occasions where I found a particular room that I knew I wanted to revisit later, but the game gave me no way of recording this information. In the remake, you can now place markers on the dungeon maps, not to mention the world map. It's a small change, but it makes a big difference, and it makes me hopeful that there are other upgrades to the systems and menus that we haven't yet seen. Lastly, I don't want to neglect the fact that this game will include the optional color dungeon that was added to Link's Awakening when it was re-released in 1998 as Link's Awakening DX for the Game Boy Color. Of course, the concept of solving color-based puzzles in a Zelda dungeon is no longer novel, but it's nice to know we'll be getting an entirely optional dungeon in addition to the main quest. This just goes to show that this game will have plenty of dungeons, but it also lets you build your own. So let's see exactly how that's going to work. By far the biggest new addition to Link's Awakening, at least in terms of gameplay, are the chamber dungeons. You may already know by now, but this is an entirely new mode that allows you to build your own Zelda dungeons room by room, or as they're called here, chamber by chamber. While I do think this is a cool feature worth a few hours of fun, I don't think it's the endless source of gameplay that you'd get from, say, Mario Maker. I'll explain why in a bit, but first, here's how it works. To start, you're given a dungeon map filled with empty tiles which you can fill with pre-designed chambers. On the top right of the Dungeon Maker screen, you'll find your selection of chambers which are organized by the number of exits they have, anywhere from 1 to 4. As you scroll through the chambers, you'll see that they're marked on the bottom with icons indicating what features they have. For example, a chest, a staircase, or a locked door. Things get tricky once you start filling the map because every chamber exit has to line up with an entrance. In other words, everything has to match up perfectly like a jigsaw puzzle, and you have to take into account the order in which certain items are acquired. For example, you obviously can't place a locked door unless you've given the player the opportunity to first collect a key. Adding another layer of challenge is the fact that each dungeon will require you to meet certain objectives as you build it. For example, one might require you to fill every available tile on the map, while another might require that you connect at least 2 staircases. Once you finally complete your dungeon, you must then play through it. The game will record your completion time, which you can then challenge friends to beat as they play through your dungeon. Lastly, you can use any Zelda-themed amiibo to add what are called plus effects, which add additional challenges into your dungeon. For example, the Link's Awakening amiibo will add Shadow Link, who chases you from chamber to chamber throughout the dungeon until you defeat him. Again, other Zelda-themed amiibo, such as those from Smash Bros. Or Breath of the Wild, will add other plus effects, which Nintendo has yet to reveal. It does seem like a lot of care went into making the chamber dungeon mode, but the reason I think it's limited is that the chambers available are all carbon copies of rooms from dungeons you've already completed in the main game. In other words, once you've beaten the game, you'll have already seen all of the chambers and solved all of their puzzles, unlike Mario Maker where every level is one of a kind. The only new things in each dungeon will be the order in which you encounter each chamber and the plus effects, assuming you have an amiibo. The silver lining is that this could be the beginning of a true Zelda Maker. When Kotaku's Jason Schreier asked the game's producer, Eiji Aonuma, whether he might develop a Zelda Maker, he responded, quote, "I can't predict the future, but if people do love this idea of arranging dungeons, I'll keep that in mind going forward," end quote. So it's not out of the question, which is great news. And at the end of the day, I'm not going to complain because Link's Awakening for Switch is likely to be fantastic, and I haven't even mentioned what might be the best improvements of all: the updated graphics and sound. I normally don't talk about graphics or audio in my videos because I like to focus on gameplay, but since Link's Awakening is receiving such a dramatic technical overhaul, it seemed appropriate here. With the new art style, Nintendo has said they meant to make each setting look like an interactive diorama. And since there are so many secrets and adventures to discover in Link's Awakening, it makes sense that they would model the graphics after dioramas, which inherently invoke a childish sense of curiosity and exploration. Everything else on the visual front is more or less subjective, so I'll let you decide if you love the look or not. What I really want to talk about is the music. The original Link's Awakening had its own music and remixed songs from the original Legend of Zelda, and the remake updates the same tunes. So if you're a longtime Zelda fan, especially if you played Link's Awakening back in the day, get ready for a potent dose of nostalgia. I think music is one of the most underrated and overlooked elements of game design, and when paired with the right visuals, it can turn an excellent game into an unforgettable experience. That's exactly what I expect here because, let's face it, few developers use sound and music better than Nintendo, particularly when it comes to the Zelda games. Here's just a sample of the music and sound you'll experience in Link's Awakening. So there you have it. I'm pretty sure Link's Awakening is gonna be great, but as with all my previews, I still encourage you to wait until the final game releases and the reviews are out instead of pre-ordering the game. If you want to learn even more, you can find all the articles and videos I used to research this preview in the description below. If you enjoyed this video, give me a thumbs up and check out some of my other Switch-related content. If you want to keep up with what games I'm playing or hidden gems that I find, follow me on Twitter and Instagram. And if you never want to miss any of my videos, all it takes is clicking that subscribe button. Until soon, we'll see you next time.